The Aerolane, a 920, drifted through the late afternoon sky like a great silver arrow, slicing smoothly through the cool, thinning air at 20,000 feet. Sunlight glazed the fuselage in a warm gold, while below, the earth stretched out in patches of green, brown, and distant icy blue. From inside the cabin, it felt as though the world was peaceful, soft, and suspended in time. Passengers chatted lazily, sipped soft drinks, watched the flicker of movies across small seatback screens, or simply drifted into naps as the engines hummed in a steady, reassuring rhythm, asterisk at that moment. Nothing hinted at the disaster waiting only seconds ahead, asterisk in row 22. A toddler laughed as he batted at a dangling toy. In row 4, a businesswoman typed furiously on her laptop, racing a deadline. A retired couple in row 29 held hands, planning how they'd surprise their grandchildren. Flight attendants rolled carts down the aisle, handing out snacks with gentle smiles. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fabric cleaner. Asterisk, then came the sound. Asterisk, it started as a low groan metal under strain, a noise so subtle most passengers didn't notice. But the flight crew did. In the cockpit, Captain Darius Mason looked up sharply, narrowing his eyes at the vibration rippling through the control column. Asterisk, did you feel that? He asked his first officer. Asterisk, before the man could answer, the groan became a shriek. A tearing, screaming roar like the aircraft itself was crying out in agony. The entire fuselage shuddered with violent force. Overhead bins rattled. The cabin lights flickered. Drinks toppled, splashing over armrests and clothing. Gasps turned into screams. Every passenger looked up at once. The next second tore the world apart. Asterisk, an explosive crack ripped through the aircraft, so loud it drowned out the engines. A sudden, ferocious gust of wind blasted through the cabin as the plane lurched brutally left, throwing passengers sideways. Oxygen masks dropped like ghostly puppets dancing wildly in the violent air. Luggage spilled from bins. The toddler from row 22 began screaming uncontrollably. Asterisk, everyone down. Get down. One flight attendant shouted, though her voice seemed tiny compared to the roar engulfing the aircraft. Asterisk in the cockpit, alarms blared overlapping. Frantic, mechanical shrieks of fail, fault, overspeed. Decompression. The pilots fought the controls. But they were suddenly frozen, no, not frozen. Disconnected. Useless. Because the impossible had happened. Both wings were gone. Asterisk. The left wing sheared off first, torn free by a catastrophic structural collapse. The right wing followed seconds later, ripped away as if some invisible giant had reached out and swept the aircraft clean. Without them, the plane lost all lift and stability, entering a horrifying freefall. Asterisk, the A920 did not so much descend as plummet nose tilting downward, tail rising as the cabin tilted into a steep angle. Items flew through the air. A woman's purse struck the ceiling before falling back onto her lap. A laptop careened past a row of passengers and shattered against a wall. The businesswoman in row 4 clung to her armrests. Knuckles white, her laptop forgotten. Asterisk from the outside. The aircraft looked like a wounded steel shell falling from the sky, its engine still attached but useless. Its body shaking with uncontrollable vibrations. Pieces of insulation and metal spraying out behind it in a widening trail of debris. Asterisk inside. Chaos reigned. Asterisk passengers cried, prayed, screamed. Some clutched hands with strangers. Others buried their faces in their laps, trembling. A few stared out cracked windows in blank shock as clouds whooshed past at terrifying speeds. Asterisk A. Man in row 18 tried to stand, adrenaline numbing his fear, but the tilting cabin threw him backward into his seat. Flight attendants scrambled on hands and knees, trying to secure belts, shouting instructions drowned by the wind and alarms. Asterisk, brace positions. Heads down now, shouted one attendant, gripping a seat so tightly her fingers bled. Asterisk, the cabin pressure had dropped sharply during the initial wing failure, and the rushing air howled through microscopic breaches in the fuselage. Ceiling panels trembled. Some light fixtures tore loose and swung violently. Asterisk, in the cockpit. The pilots fought. Asterisk, Captain Mason pulled the yoke with all his strength, but it moved too freely, as though disconnected from reality. His first officer attempted to deploy emergency stabilization systems, but half the controls were dark. The altimeter numbers spun rapidly downward. Asterisk, we've lost both wings, Mason said, disbelief choking his voice. Mayday, we've... The radio cut out. The cockpit shook violently. The window cracked. Both men were thrown against their harnesses as the aircraft pitched again. Faster now, more violently. Asterisk, passengers felt gravity shift. Felt the weightlessness of falling. Felt the horrible knowledge that they might not survive the next minute. Asterisk, the aerolane. A 920 was dying. Asterisk, but in seat 17A, a quiet, solitary girl with dark hair and steady eyes sat perfectly still, frightened. Yes, but thinking. Asterisk. Hana Aramori had always been a quiet girl, so quiet that most people forgot she was in the room even while looking directly at her. At 16, she had the soft, reserved manner of someone who listened more than she spoke, who observed the world with a deep intelligence she rarely revealed. She sat alone in seat 17A, her slender form framed against the oval window, asterisk, when the first tremor rattled the plane. She instantly felt the wrong rhythm beneath her shoes, felt the strain in the metal frame like a sickening pulse. Even as others ignored the warning signs, Hana's mind was already running through possibilities, reviewing every structural diagram she had memorized over the years. Asterisk. Her fascination with planes had begun before she could even read. While other children built castles from blocks, she built miniature aircraft. Instead of fairy tales, she devoured flight manuals and engineering texts. Her bedroom was lined with blueprints and cutaway diagrams of jetliners. It wasn't a hobby. It was a quiet obsession. Asterisk, but she had never expected it would matter now. Asterisk. And then the wings tore off. Asterisk, the world around her dissolved into chaos. Her seat jolted violently, her head striking the sidewall, and a mask swung down in front of her. People screamed around her, shrill, human, panicked. A wave of shrieking wind blasted down the center aisle. Hana's hair whipped wildly, her eyes narrowed, her breath shaking. Asterisk, but inside her mind, the noise silenced. Asterisk, her heart pounded, but her thoughts sharpened, slicing through fear like a blade. She forced herself to breathe deeply, anchoring her shaking hands. Calm down. Think. The aircraft was falling, but not spinning uncontrollably, not yet. That meant she had a narrow window of influence. Asterisk, she scanned the cabin. People clutched their masks. A few tried to stand but were thrown back. A flight attendant crawled along the aisle, crying as she tried to help passengers reach brace positions. Overhead lights flickered and dimmed. Some panels had torn loose, revealing a tangle of wires. Hana unbuckled her seatbelt. A man in the aisle seat grabbed her wrist. "Stay down." "Sweetheart, you can't move. You'll get hurt." Asterisk, Hana met his terrified gaze. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was steady. Asterisk, "I know where I need to go." Asterisk, her words stunned him. He didn't release her immediately, but she gently pulled her arm free, and this time he didn't fight it. Some primal instinct told him that this strange, quiet girl somehow knew more than the rest of them. Hannah gripped the edges of seats as she moved forward, forcing her body against the violent tilt of the falling fuselage. She crawled at times, half stumbled at others, but kept going. A flight attendant saw her struggling up the aisle. Miss, you have to sit down, please. The attendant shouted, voice trembling so violently she could barely speak. Hannah knelt briefly beside her. I need access to the cockpit. The attendant stared, confused and terrified. Why? Because I might be able to stop this. Hannah whispered. There was something in the way she said it, not bold, not dramatic. Just factual, quiet, absolute. The attendant froze, uncertainty flashing across her face as the plane shuddered again, pitching slightly. In that moment, a heavy storage container broke loose from an overhead bin behind them and crashed into the aisle where Hannah had just been standing. The attendant's eyes widened. It dawned on her that this girl hadn't been paralyzed by fear. She had been thinking ahead, surviving by moving with purpose. Go. The attendant whispered. Hannah nodded once and continued forward. The aisle seemed impossibly long. People reached out, grabbing at her clothes, trying to steady themselves, trying not to be alone. Someone was crying for their mother. Someone else prayed loudly, words indistinguishable beneath the roar of the wind. Hannah kept going. At last she reached the reinforced door of the cockpit. It hung partially ajar, damaged in the decompression. She pushed it open and stepped into a different world. The cockpit was a storm of alarms. Warning lights strobed red across every surface. The pilots lay slumped forward, unconscious, their heads fallen against their harnesses. A crack snaked across the main windshield. Stray papers swirled through the air like distressed birds. Hannah slipped into the captain's seat, her small frame dwarfed by the hardware around her. She touched the controls gently, almost reverently. Most people would have seen a nightmare of flashing lights and noise. Hannah saw data systems failing, power rerouting, structural integrity dropping. She understood it instantly. She whispered to herself, okay, I can still do this. She reached for the emergency power routing system. She knew the A920's design. She knew the internal stability thrusters weren't designed to fly the aircraft alone, but they could orient it, keep it from entering an unrecoverable spin. Behind her, the fuselage groaned, metal protesting the stress of freefall. Hannah's hands moved faster. Her quiet mind, the one people overlooked, became the only calm place in a dying aircraft. And for the first time, she understood that being invisible her whole life had been a strange kind of preparation. She, the quiet girl in seat 17A, was the only person on board who knew what to do. The cockpit vibrated like the inside of a drum as the wingless Aerolane A920 continued its uncontrolled dive toward the earth. The air howled through tiny fractures in the windshield, the shriek so sharp it felt like shards of sound cutting through the air itself. Warning lights pulsed red across every display. Hannah sat strapped in the captain's seat, dwarfed by the wall of failing instruments, her fingers trembling but determined. The first challenge was stabilizing the aircraft's rotation. Without wings, the fuselage wanted to tumble, to roll and spin until it tore itself apart. It was already beginning a slow, sickening tilt that sent loose objects skidding across the cockpit floor. Hannah exhaled through her nose. Not yet. Not yet. Please hold together. She tapped into the emergency power routing system, one the pilots rarely used, one most passengers didn't know existed. The internal stability thrusters were tiny directional jets embedded within the aircraft's belly and tail section. They were meant for fine midder adjustments during turbulence or autopilot corrections. They were not designed to keep an aircraft aloft, but they were all she had. The panel flickered to life under her fingertips. A schematic of the aircraft appeared, red-lined, broken, but functional enough for her to work with. She rerouted what remained of the auxiliary power into the thruster controls. The plane lurched harder. Angling steeper, Hana braced herself, holding the yoke even though it was useless for lift. The ground was still thousands of feet below, but rushing upward with growing speed. She felt her stomach twist as gravity pulled her downward. The falling sensation made her lightheaded. Focus. She triggered the left side belly thrusters. A jolt shuddered through the aircraft. The roll slowed. The plane began to tilt the opposite direction. Too far. She activated the right side thrusters. The plane responded sluggishly, like a sleeping giant forced awake. It groaned, shuddered, creaked, but obeyed. Hannah's heartbeat thudded in her throat. She glanced at the unconscious pilots. Captain Mason's head lolled to the side, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. The first officer had fallen partly out of his seat, his straps twisted around his torso. They had done everything they could. Now it was her turn. She spoke softly, as if they could hear her. "I'll keep us steady. I promise." The plane's descent rate slowed slightly, not enough to stop the fall, but enough to buy precious seconds. Enough for Hana to think. The internal thrusters could prevent a full spin, but they couldn't create lift. She needed drag, something to slow them down, something to turn a catastrophic fall into a survivable impact. Her mind raced through every emergency system she'd ever studied. Parachute wings? No, A920s weren't built with them. Foam deployment? Only on cargo models. Structural air brakes? Yes. Her hands flew across the controls. The ventral air brake system was a series of large, retractable panels on the underside of the fuselage, meant to assist during steep descents in mountainous regions. They were never intended for wingless freefall, but they were solid, reinforced, and operational. She deployed them. A violent jerk threw her against her harness. The air brakes extended like four metallic fins, catching the rushing air. The drag multiplied instantly. Passengers in the cabin screamed as the aircraft shuddered, metal grinding loudly beneath their feet. But the descent slowed again, still too fast. Still deadly. But less deadly than before. Hana checked the altimeter. 12,000 feet, her throat tightened. That wasn't much time. She leveled the aircraft using short, controlled bursts of the stability thrusters, guiding it away from mountains and densely populated areas. Through the cracked cockpit window, she spotted a vast stretch of dry lakebed, a pale, flat expanse that shimmered in the fading daylight. A landing, not a safe landing. Not a real landing, but survivable. If she aimed perfectly, she adjusted the descent angle. The thrusters coughed, overworked. The aircraft groaned, its frame bending under stress. Panels rattled. A monitor fizzled out, sparks spitting. Come on. Just hold a little longer. 9,000 feet. The lakebed grew larger in her field of view. A slow sense of direction returned to the aircraft as she coaxed the trajectory downward. 6,000 feet. In the cabin, passengers clung to armrests, family members holding one another. Some prayed aloud. Others simply stared at the floor, tears streaming silently down their cheeks. 4,000 feet. The aircraft was still moving too fast. Hana deployed the secondary air brakes. The jolt nearly knocked her unconscious. The plane groaned under the strain, metal plates bending. But the fall slowed again. 2,000 feet. Hana gripped the yoke, even though it offered no lift, just stability through the thrusters. She whispered to herself, please. 1,000 feet. The earth rushed toward them. She leveled the nose perfectly. 500 feet. The lakebed spread before them like a giant, dusty runway. Impact. The fuselage slammed into the ground with the force of a small earthquake. The tail section struck first, crumpling, then the nose. A deafening scream of metal against earth echoed across the desert. Inside, passengers were thrown violently forward, restrained only by their belts. Dust engulfed the aircraft in a choking cloud. The A920 skidded for nearly 1,000 feet, before grinding to a brutal, shuddering stop, then silence, broken only by the sound of Hannah's ragged breathing. She had done it. 200 souls were still alive. For several long seconds after the aircraft screeched to a halt, it seemed the world had forgotten how to move. Dust billowed around the shattered fuselage in thick, hazy swirls, catching the last rays of sunlight. The airlane A920 sat wounded on the dry lakebed, its metal skin torn, its engines warped, both wings gone. The scene should have been one of devastation. And yet, somehow, impossibly, the main cabin remained intact. Inside. Silence clung to the air like fog. Hannah sat in the captain's seat, her hands still gripping the inert yoke, her chest rising and falling in shallow, trembling breaths. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears, louder than the alarms, louder than the groaning metal. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until her lungs burned for air. She let go of the controls. Her arms fell to her sides, weak with exhaustion. Tiny tremors ran along her fingers. She stared at the cracked cockpit window, unable to fully grasp what she had just done. The impossibility of it. The unlikeliness of every second that had led her here. She had saved them. A small, broken laugh escaped her. Or maybe it was a sob. Even she wasn't sure. Behind her. A quiet voice broke the stillness. Hello? Is anyone here? Are you okay? It was one of the flight attendants, her voice hoarse from screaming, her eyes wide with shock. She stumbled into the cockpit, still gripping the doorframe as though afraid the plane might suddenly vanish beneath her. She looked at the unconscious pilots. Then at Hannah, this slender, quiet girl with wind-tangled hair and a trembling body. You? You flew us down? Hannah swallowed, her voice barely more than a whisper. I just tried. The attendant's mouth wavered. Tears sprang to her eyes, not of fear this time, but of relief. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Hannah without hesitation, the hug desperate and grateful. Hannah froze, unaccustomed to such closeness. Thank you, the woman whispered into her shoulder. You saved all of us. Hannah didn't know how to respond. Her voice didn't want to come, so she simply nodded. Outside the aircraft, the first groans of survivors began to rise. People stirred, coughed, unclipped seatbelts with shaking hands. Some cried, some laughed, some just stared blankly. A few helped others to stand. The toddler who had been playing in row 22 wailed loudly, and his mother hugged him so tightly he yelped, though she didn't seem to notice. As passengers began evacuating through the emergency slides, a cluster formed near the cockpit door. Word had spread quickly among them. A teenage girl had landed the plane. Passengers limping, coughing, bloodied stopped to look at her. Their eyes held awe, disbelief, gratitude so intense she felt herself shrinking back into the seat. A man with a broken arm whispered, She's just a kid. No, said the businesswoman from row 4, her voice thick with emotion. She's the reason we're alive. But the attention only made Hannah more uncomfortable. She lowered her eyes, staring at her shoes, wishing she could disappear. She had never liked being watched. She had never been the center of anything. Someone touched her shoulder. It was the man who had grabbed her wrist earlier, back in the aisle. You were right, he said softly. You knew what to do. I'm sorry I doubted you. It's okay. Hannah murmured. She meant it. By the time emergency vehicles arrived, sirens wailing in the distance like triumphant cries, the passengers had mostly evacuated. Some sat on the ground, wrapped in emergency blankets, staring at the smoldering wreckage. Others paced aimlessly, hands shaking, still trying to comprehend the miracle that had just occurred. Firefighters and paramedics swarmed the site, expecting carnage. What they found instead was astonishing. A cracked but intact fuselage, 200 passengers breathing. A landing no one could explain. And a girl alone. Small, exhausted, sitting on the ground near the cockpit, staring at her dust-covered shoes. A paramedic approached her cautiously. Are you injured? Hannah shook her head. Her throat felt raw. No, just tired. The paramedic crouched beside her. I heard you were the one who brought the aircraft down. Hannah didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to process something so enormous. She had never been praised like this, never been truly seen. Her entire life, people had underestimated her, overlooked her, treated her quietness as emptiness. Now, their lives were the proof she wasn't empty at all. Within an hour, reporters arrived by helicopter, their voices buzzing with the urgency of history in motion. Cameras clicked. Microphones pointed. Questions flew toward her faster than she could think. How did you do it? What were you thinking during the descent? Are you a prodigy? How does it feel to be a hero? Hannah hugged her knees and shook her head. I'm not a hero, she whispered, but the survivors disagreed. To them, she was more than a hero. She was a miracle. In the days that followed, her name would appear across headlines. Pilots would call her brilliant. Engineers would call her extraordinary. Survivors would call her their guardian. But Hannah didn't crave fame or praise. She would remember only the moment the wheels well. The fuselage hit the earth and the screams fell silent. She would remember knowing that she had saved 200 souls. And she would remember sitting in seat 17 alone, quiet, invisible, before the world finally saw her.